have on that. Let's move on to the WNBA CBA. So we talked about the most recent meeting that happened on Monday. It was a 3-hour meeting. The players basically said that the WNBA didn't come with any proposal, and so they didn't really get anywhere. We went over that in our last episode, so make sure that you refer to that if you need to be caught up on everything. However, we did get some insider information of the proposal that the WNBA presented.
That exhaustion you just heard. That's not just about juggling 2 jobs. Breanna Stewart just admitted on camera that her brain is hurting from trying to negotiate a collective bargaining agreement while simultaneously running a competing basketball league. And somehow, nobody in the WNBA seems to think this is a massive problem. Because here's what's actually happening right now. The WNBA Players Association Executive Committee is in the middle of the most important contract negotiation in league history. They're fighting for revenue sharing, guaranteed contracts, and salaries that could reach $2.4 million within 5 years. And 3 of the most powerful voices at that negotiating table, Breanna Stewart, Nafisa Collier, and Kelsey Plum, are also the co-founders and part owners of Unrivaled, a league that directly competes with the WNBA for off-season attention, sponsorship dollars, and media coverage. This isn't just a scheduling conflict. This is a fundamental conflict of interest that could shape the future of women's professional basketball.
And we don't want to lose that.
That becomes a theme in this conversation, is her saying that she feels a little bit torn. She's saying that she wants to focus on Unrivaled, but she also wants to make sure that this CBA gets done. And we'll get to more of that later on. Let's continue.
Like you said, you're comparing apples to oranges. The W and the NBA, like, contracts are vastly different.
Very skewed, yeah.
So it's like, yeah, the top 10, maybe 15 players can survive without a W contract.
Listen to what she just said. I want 2 things to both be successful. That sounds reasonable on the surface. Who wouldn't want multiple opportunities for women's basketball players? But let's be clear about what that actually means in a negotiation context. When Breanna Stewart sits down with WNBA executives to negotiate the CBA, she's not just representing WNBA players. She's also protecting her own financial investment in a competing product. Every decision she makes at that table has to be filtered through 2 completely different sets of interests. Does she push harder for year-round WNBA salaries, which would make Unrivaled less necessary? Or does she leave room for players to need Unrivaled as a financial supplement? The WNBA offered a proposal that would raise the average player salary to $540,000 in 2026 and potentially over $1 million by 2030. That's not a small increase. That's a salary structure that could fundamentally change whether players need to play overseas or in alternative leagues during the offseason. But the executive committee rejected it, saying the league didn't come with a real proposal. Meanwhile, Unrivaled is paying players $100,000 for 8 weeks of work, positioning itself as the solution to the WNBA's salary problems. You see the conflict here?
It's over. The Caitlin Clark NBA crossover, Caitlin Clark's debut as an NBA analyst on NBC. So the ratings were just released for that Lakers-Knicks game on Sunday, and it was the most watched regular season Sunday night NBA game since 2002. They had 4.5 million viewers on NBC, and it peaked at 5 million. Now, we don't know for sure if this was because Caitlin Clark was part of the broadcast, but I do think her being part of the broadcast definitely drew more eyeballs to the game. Now, I think she was on television for only 13 minutes, but she did the pregame. She was up there with Maria Taylor, Carmelo Anthony, and Reggie Miller. But this was the most watched game of the season so far across all networks, except for the tip-off games and also Christmas Day.
Now let's talk about what actually happened on Sunday, February 2nd, because this is where the Caitlin Clark factor becomes impossible to ignore. NBC aired a Lakers versus Knicks game that pulled 4.5 million viewers, peaking at 5 million. That made it the most watched regular season Sunday night NBA game since 2002. Not this decade, since 2002. Caitlin Clark was on screen for exactly 13 minutes during the pregame show. She sat alongside Maria Taylor, Carmelo Anthony, and Reggie Miller, breaking down basketball at the highest level. And NBC's Rick Cordella went out of his way to praise her performance, specifically noting her understanding of the game and her ability to communicate clearly. Those aren't generic compliments. Those are the exact qualities that translate to broadcast value. Can we definitively prove Caitlin Clark caused those ratings? No. But NBC clearly thinks she was a factor, because they've already scheduled her for another appearance on March 29th for the Knicks vs. Thunder game. And Cordella explicitly said he hopes to see more of Clark moving forward. That's not how networks talk about analysts who don't move the needle. Here's why this matters for the WNBA CBA negotiations. The Players Association is demanding revenue sharing based on projected growth. They want a percentage of gross revenue instead of fixed salary increases. But the league's entire argument is that they need to maintain profitability and incentivize team investment. And right now, the biggest ratings driver in women's basketball just demonstrated that she can pull 5 million viewers to an NBA broadcast by being on screen for 30.
So we talked about the most recent meeting that happened on Monday. It was a 3-hour meeting. The players basically said that the WNBA didn't come with any proposal, and so they didn't really get anywhere. We went over that in our last episode, so make sure that you refer to that if you need to be caught up on everything. However, we did get some insider information of the proposal that the WNBA presented to the players. This is the most recent proposal, and I guess they also brought this to the meeting on.
Let's break down what the WNBA actually put on the table, because the leaked proposal documents tell a very different story than what the players are saying publicly. These documents were marked confidential, but they're now circulating all over social media, which means either someone leaked them intentionally or the WNBA released them to control the narrative. The proposal has 3 stated goals. First, substantially increase player salaries to reflect recent and future business growth. That's the exact language Adam Silver has used in every public statement about the CBA. Second, promote business health and profitability. And third, maintain incentives for team and league investment. Here's what that translates to in actual dollars. The max salary would jump from $250,000 in 2025 to $1.295 million in 2026. By 2031, that max salary reaches $1.87 million, and in a higher revenue scenario, it could hit $2.4 million. That's not incremental growth. That's nearly doubling the max salary in 5 years. The average player salary follows the same trajectory, currently $120,000. Under this proposal, $540,000 in 2026. By 2030, the average salary would be $780,000, potentially reaching $1 million in a higher revenue scenario. Now compare that to NBA salaries in their 30th season, adjusted for inflation. WNBA players under this proposal would actually be making more than NBA players were at the same point in their league's development. That's not a talking point. That's
Monday. It's so funny on all of these documents. In the corner it says confidential, but they are currently circulating all around Twitter. So I want to go over some of these bullet points with you guys. The first slide, it said WNBA CBA proposal goals for a win-win CBA. Number 1, substantially increase player salaries to reflect recent future business growth. That number 1 bullet point is something that Adam Silver has said many of times when he is asked about the WNBA CBA. This is, again, it seems to be why the two sides are on different sides. It seems like the WNBA wants to raise the salary enough to where they don't have to give a percentage of this gross revenue that the players want.
But here's where it gets complicated. The proposal includes 37 bullet points of improvements, and the 2 that went viral on social media are complimentary all-star tickets for all players and free WNBA League Pass. People are clowning the league for including those, treating them like insulting add-ons to a serious negotiation, and yeah, those 2 items are ridiculous to highlight, but they're distracting from the actually significant points in that proposal. Point number 7, more allowable guaranteed contracts per team. That's huge. Guaranteed contracts have been one of the biggest sticking points for years. Point number 9, 2 new developmental player roster spots. That directly addresses the roster depth issues that plagued multiple teams last season when injuries hit. Point number 16 is fascinating. Recognition payment for current retirees. That means the WNBA is offering to pay players who are already retired. How far back does that go? Are we talking about players from the league's inaugural season in 1997? Because if so, that's a significant financial commitment that goes beyond current player compensation. And point number 17, increased per diem with annual cost of living increases. This is critical because one of the major sticking points has been housing. The players want the WNBA to pay for their housing even with increased salaries. The league is countering with higher per diem instead. That's a fundamental disagreement about how compensation should be structured.
So it was going around social media that Coach Brandon Payne, aka Steph Curry's shooting coach, so he is a performance coach. He's most famously known for working with Stephen Curry. He was at Butler and he posted this in his Instagram story. He said, one of the best college venues in college basketball. Always fun to be at Butler, in a gym where Hoosiers was filmed. And a lot of people were wondering, like, why is he at a random college in Indianapolis, Indiana? Now, other fans were saying that this is not the first time that he's recently been in Indiana, so a lot of people are speculating that he might actually be working with Caitlin Clark. And I wouldn't be surprised because Coach Brandon Payne has also posted some things in his story about like Caitlin Clark's shoe, or when Steph Curry was wearing Caitlin Clark's PE. I don't remember if he was actually warming up for the game or if he wore it in game, but there has been some rumblings that he might be working with Caitlin.
This is the part that doesn't get enough attention. Breanna Stewart just said on camera that Unrivaled is showing that when you put players on social media, in games, in any media format, people watch. And she's right. Unrivaled's viewership numbers have been solid. The production quality is excellent. The basketball is competitive. It's proving that there's an audience for women's basketball outside the traditional WNBA season. But then she says, we can't not have that for our summer season in the WNBA. And that's where the conflict becomes impossible to ignore. Because what she's essentially arguing is that the WNBA needs to learn from Unrivaled's success. She's using her own competing league as evidence for what the WNBA should be doing differently. That's not advocacy for WNBA players. That's a sales pitch for Unrivaled's business model. Think about how this plays in a negotiation. The WNBA says, we're offering you salaries that will average $1 million within 5 years. And the executive committee, led by people who own a competing league, says, that's not good enough. We need revenue sharing. Meanwhile, Unrivaled is positioned as the alternative if the WNBA doesn't meet their demands. Natasha Cloud already said it out loud. If there's a strike or lockout, everybody can go play in Unrivaled. That's not a hypothetical backup plan. That's leverage. And it's leverage that the executive committee members personally benefit from because they own equity in Unrivaled.
Apples to oranges. The W and the NBA, like, contracts are vastly different.
Very skewed, yeah.
So it's like, yeah, the top 10, maybe 15 players can survive without a W contract.
Right.
But the rest, it's like, no, you don't want to go that much without getting paid.
Here's what makes this situation so complicated, and why it's not just about bad intentions or greed. Breanna Stewart genuinely seems to believe that both leagues can be successful. She's looking at this from a pure business standpoint, trying to figure out how to create the most opportunities for women's basketball players. That's not a villainous motivation. That's actually admirable in a lot of ways. But intention doesn't eliminate conflict of interest. The structure of the situation creates inherent problems regardless of anyone's personal integrity. When Stewart sits at the CBA negotiating table, she can't separate her role as a WNBA player advocate from her role as an Unrivaled co-founder. Every decision impacts both entities. If the WNBA agrees to year-round salaries and comprehensive benefits, does that reduce the market need for Unrivaled? If the WNBA maintains a shorter season and lower total compensation, does that increase Unrivaled's value proposition? She said her brain is hurting from trying to be present at Unrivaled while also being part of the executive committee. That's not just stress from being busy. That's cognitive dissonance from trying to serve two masters with competing interests. And the same applies to Nafisa Collier and Kelsey Plum. All three of them are in the exact same position. They're negotiating a CBA that could fundamentally change whether their own business venture remains necessary. The WNBA has never been profitable in its 29. The league is still building towards sustainability, and the people negotiating on behalf of the players have a financial stake in an alternative league that benefits if the WNBA doesn't fully meet player demands. That's not a conspiracy theory, That's just the reality of the situation. Compare WNBA salaries in their 30th season under this proposal to NBA salaries in their 30th season, adjusted for inflation. WNBA players would actually be making more. That's significant context that gets lost when the narrative becomes the league isn't offering enough. More than the NBA at the same stage of development. Because the numbers don't support that argument. The WNBA is focused on business health and profitability because they've never achieved it. They're trying to build a sustainable model that doesn't require NBA subsidies. That's not greed. That's survival. And the proposal reflects that priority with substantial salary increases tied to revenue growth projections. But the players want a percentage of gross revenue instead of fixed salary increase. They want the same model the NBA has, where players get roughly 50% of basketball-related income. The problem is, the NBA had that model in their 30th season because they were already profitable. The WNBA isn't there yet. So you have two sides arguing from completely different premises. The league says, we need to become profitable first, then we can share revenue. The players say we deserve revenue sharing now because we're driving the growth. Both arguments have merit, but they're fundamentally incompatible without one side compromise. And the people leading the players' side of that negotiation also own a league that becomes more valuable if the compromise doesn't happen. Breanna Stewart said she wants both things to be successful, but she can't say she cares about the WNBA more than Unrivaled, or vice versa, because that would undermine one of her investments. She has to maintain that both can thrive simultaneously, but the incentive structure suggests otherwise. If the WNBA agrees to everything the players are demanding, salaries go up dramatically, benefits improve, housing gets covered, and the need for supplemental income from alternative leagues decreased. If the WNBA holds firm and the players reject the proposal, there's a potential strike or lockout, and Unrivaled becomes the primary option for elite players during that time. Unrivaled has already positioned itself as the solution. They're paying $100,000 for 8 weeks. They're providing equity stakes to players. They're building a media presence and brand partnerships. And they've explicitly said that if the WNBA has a work stoppage, they'll be ready to absorb those players. That's not collaboration, that's competition. The 3-hour meeting on Monday reportedly went nowhere because the WNBA didn't come with a new proposal. But we now know they had brought this exact proposal to the table. So either the players didn't consider it a real proposal because it didn't include revenue sharing, or there's a disconnect about what constitutes good faith negotiation. The confidential documents leaking to social media feels intentional. Either the players leaked them to show what they're up against, or the WNBA leaked them to demonstrate they're offering substantial increases. Either way, it's negotiation through public pressure, which usually means the private conversations aren't working. Caitlin Clark doing NBA broadcasts during this time adds another layer. She's demonstrating crossover appeal that could justify the WNBA's revenue growth projections. If she can pull 5 million viewers to an NBA game, what does that mean for WNBA viewership when she's actually playing? The league's entire financial model is betting on sustained growth driven by stars like Clark. The players want to be paid based on that projected growth now. The league wants to pay based on actual revenue as it materializes. Brandon Payne potentially training Caitlin Clark is relevant because it shows she's investing in her own development outside the WNBA infrastructure. She's building her brand, expanding her skill set, and creating opportunities that don't depend on the league. That's smart business, but it also reflects a broader trend of players creating their own platforms and revenue streams independent of the WNBA. Unrivaled is the most prominent example, but it's part of a pattern. Players are building personal brands, launching podcasts, securing individual sponsorships, and creating alternative leagues. They're not waiting for the WNBA to provide everything. They're building their own infrastructure. That's empowering in a lot of ways, but it also complicates the CBA negotiation because the players have more leverage than ever before. They don't need the WNBA as desperately as previous generations did. If the deal isn't good enough, they have other options. The WNBA knows this.
And if we don't get what we want, we will sit out, but we don't want to do that.
So this seems to be the sentiment across the board. We've heard this from most all players. They are prepared to sit out. They don't want to sit out. But can I also remind you guys, like, them striking right now doesn't really do much. They're not in the season. It's not like they're not showing up to work. They have no work to be going to. So a strike, I don't even think would be effective at this point in time. They need to continue to keep these lines of communication open if all of them are in it to have a season and to get this CBA done.
That's why the proposal includes developmental roster spots, guaranteed contracts, recognition payments for retirees, and increased per diem. They're trying to show they're invested in player welfare beyond just salary numbers.